Alrighty, we are officially live. Can anybody else still hear me? Yes? Cool. So we'll just get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to NDA's first Alumni Public Debate Series, the COVID-19 edition. Thank you to those of you that join us during the live stream, either if you join now or if you join at some point during the debate, and as well as those of you that watch the debate while it's recording. My name is Carlos Estacio. I currently serve as the Executive Director of the Newark Debate Academy. I'm a Newark Debate alumni from Wilson Avenue, class of 2006, University High School, class of 2010, and Rutgers University Newark, class of 2014. But I don't want to make this debate about me because there's all types of alumni from Newark that, without further ado, let me introduce. So on the affirmative, we have from Science Park High School, Temitope Ogundare, who is a graduating senior from Science Park High School of the class of 2010 and attended Marion P. Thomas in 2016, as well as David Asafu Ajayi, who graduated from Science Park in 2017, attended Mount Vernon Elementary School in 2013, and is currently a junior at Rutgers University, Newark, where he debated at all three levels. And on the negative, we have Mercy Wah, who is currently a junior at University High School and attended Chancellor Avenue Elementary School. And we have Ryan Hemnerine, who was an alumni of First Avenue, is an alumni of First Avenue School 2014, and graduated from University High School in 2018, and currently coaches at University High School. I forgot to mention that about David. David coaches at Science Park. So as you can see, we have a pretty healthy rivalry of Science Park High School versus University High School, where if you're from Newark, you will know that is a long-standing rivalry between the schools, but also the coaches of the respective programs that either are alumni have now went back to work with those particular students. So this entire debate is featured not only from top to bottom, but also our panelists of Newark Debate alumni from a whole slew of generations. So I'll just introduce the panel before I introduce the moderator, who will talk more about the debate. So first, we have Diana Cruz, who is a Science Park alumni of the class of 1989 and is a member of the Newark Debate Academy board. We also have Chris Oshiro, who is a Science Park alumni of the class of 1992 and is the chairman of the board of advisors for the Newark Debate Academy. We have Kevin Senak, who is a Science Park alumni from the class of 2007 and is currently the head coach of Eastside High School. And we have Chaz Weish, American History High School class of 2014 and former Rutgers University Newark debater and currently a graduate assistant at Wichita State and head coach of North Star Academy. Now, the only person that I haven't introduced that is on this call is Devon Murphy, who is the assistant director of the Newark Debate Academy, as well as an alumni of Science Park High School. I forget the year, he can tell you, I want to say 13 or 11. Yeah, Science Park High School 2011, and also a graduate of Rutgers University Newark. So without further ado, Devon will tell you more about the topic, the debate, and what it is that the students will be talking about.
Thank you for the introduction, Carlos. Again, my name is Devon Murphy, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Newark Debate Academy. So as a quick introduction, we are in the midst of an immense pandemic that has gone from novelty anecdote to international public health crisis. The coronavirus, or also known as COVID-19, and our community's responses to it have had a disparate impact on underserved populations around the world, especially in our country and our own individual communities. As public administrators plan policies moving forward and they plan our responses to both the end of the first wave and the start of the second wave of the virus, priority should be placed on those at-risk communities that are already previously underserved. Thus, the resolution for our debate is, in response to a second COVID-19 outbreak, the 50 states in all relevant territories should enforce substantial stay-at-home restrictions. I'll turn to the affirmative so that we may begin.
Am I heard clearly?
Was our first affirmative? We have Temitope Ogundare. Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Every step toward the goal of justice requires sacrifice and passionate concern of dedicated individuals." Stay-at-home restrictions are a big but necessary sacrifice for the well-being and progress of our communities. Therefore, we are proud to affirm. In response to a second COVID-19 outbreak, the 50 states and all relevant territories should enforce substantial stay-at-home restrictions. Much like New Zealand did, states should engage in waves of stimulus instead of one-time packages, upgrades to resource distribution, and levels of lockdown. Contention 1. White people want to sacrifice Black people for the economy. Protests of stay-at-home orders are overwhelmingly white. Here are some slogans from these protests. I prefer dangerous freedom over peaceful slavery. Open up the zoo, Legoland, and Disney. These majority white protests in Huntington Beach in Florida don't represent this country. Most of the participants at these protests are well over the median income. Yet, they will say the economy needs to be saved because it provides for everyone. We shouldn't prioritize the economy over the community. The heart of the nation isn't dollar bills, but Black and brown lives. And yet, big business would tell us that our lives are worth risking for the sake of the economy. According to Harmeet Kaur of CNN, counties with higher populations of Black residents accounted for 52% of coronavirus diagnoses and 58% of COVID-19 deaths nationally. This mindset of sacrificing Black lives for white comfort extends back to slavery. As Black people die at higher rates across the US, white people protest for haircuts. We can't defend this vision of America. Our communities are more than mouthpieces for the elite. Contention 2. If we think of America as still being a democracy, we should uphold stay-at-home orders. There is overwhelming public support for them. According to John Halterwanger, Business Insider, 6 different polls conducted all over the country came to the same conclusion. Most people want to enforce stay-at-home order, with the lowest poll showing 63% support for enforcement. He continues, this support exists in spite of Trump and his allies at Fox News encouraging violations of the state orders. Trump is undermining democracy by encouraging a minority to overrule the majority and endanger the population. This disregard for public opinion is what turns a flawed democracy, as the democracy index rates the US to an authoritarian regime like China or Russia. Contention 3. Stay-at-home orders are good because they give us time to reflect on the state of our country. It goes without saying that stay-at-home orders, at the least, help flatten the curve, which buys us time to find a permanent solution. Nearly 1,000 COVID cases in Georgia were contact traced back to interactions following the state reopening. But more importantly, it's forcing ordinary Americans to realize that we have been lied to. We are finding out that jobs they said you couldn't do without being in the office for 8 hours can be done from home. The government is being forced to improve its service delivery. These restrictions are not a curse, but an opportunity to revisit our national myths. It's an opportunity for national therapy. A single mother of 3 who never got an hour to spend with her kids can now make a full living while seeing them. Big business is afraid remote working will deck productivity. First, this fear is irrational. A survey by the Workforce Institute shows that most people complete primary work duties in 25 hours or less a week. But furthermore, stats show that too much time on site actually demotivates workers. So ironically, trying to reopen the economy might kill the economy on top of killing thousands of Black and brown people. The answer is clear: stay at home.
Great. Thank you, Timothy. Now we will have a cross-examination between our first affirmative speaker, Timothy, and our second negative speaker, Mercy Watt.
Okay. Who are the essential workers?
There are multiple divisions of essential workers. The list includes healthcare, first responders, people that work within the food and agriculture industry.
So
There are people that
you say your contention 3 is all about how different work can be like transformed home and is better for the economy. How does a bus driver or like someone who works in a retail store work from home?
I would say that first, in terms of commercial retail, like clothes and things, those are things that have been sort of limited, I guess. But for bus drivers, take for example here in Newark, people have to now come into the bus from the back.
Okay.
Bus fare is free, so that way you don't need to go to the front, and they
Okay.
have their gloves
How would
and
the
mask on.
second wave lockdown be different from the first?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Do you mind repeating it?
How would a second wave lockdown be different from first?
I would say that obviously with the new progressions that have happened with the virus, the way in which our lockdown procedures happen would thus have to develop with them.
Let's talk about New Zealand a little bit. Could you like give me at least two similarities between New Zealand and the United States?
We think that in terms of just the general model that could still be adopted, it's still
So
something
I
that's
think
a
I
good idea.
understand that you want to adopt the model. The question is how, what similarities that, what is the similarities between New Zealand and United States that allows us to be, for us to properly adapt that model?
At the very
Okay, that's fine. Contention two, you say that staying at home equals more safety. So is there no alternative way that we can be able to like reopen the world and still be able to like enact in like engage within the economy like we did before without like, is there like no other alternative? Is staying home the only way to do that?
We think that in terms of beating the virus itself, stay-at-home orders are the best and most effective method.
Okay. You say your contention three says that reflection is a good time to reflect. What exactly will people be reflecting on?
Just the way in which like America runs now. Take for example, like any sort of tech
So
company that had their workers
stay at
come.
home. You need to stay at home, be on lockdown 24/7 in order for you to properly reflect about America.
Wait, I'm sorry, say it again.
You need to sit at home 24/7 for you to like reflect on like the prime issues that happen in America, because obviously like COVID-19 is not the only thing. We have like racial issues, we have like money issues, things like that. Do you need to stay home to do that?
I think in terms of the underlying issues related to the topic that we're talking about, in terms of like the way in which the world works and the economy is structured, yes,
Or-
staying at home does allow for that reflection.
Okay.
All right, thank y'all. Now we will have some prep time for the first negative speaker, who's Ryan Himnaran. Okay, perfect. Time's up. First negative speech, Ryan.
Is everybody ready? All right, starting now. Good evening. My name is Ryan Hemnerine, and my partner Mercy Wah and I negate the resolution resolved. Contention 1, racial inequality. Why is it that Black and brown people can make up less than half of the state's population, yet represent over half of the deaths due to COVID-19? This is true in states such as Washington, D.C., Mississippi, Georgia, Louisiana, and more. Yet some good weather and a hint of summer can neglect this fact. A.R. Shaw, an author from Rolling Out, writes, quote, "Some police are using violence to enforce social distancing orders and are using force against minorities. Police have taken this quarantine as an excuse to ramp up their brutality to historic levels, all in the name of social distancing," unquote. Ashley Southall, reporter from the New York Times, adds, quote, "The arrest of Black minorities and Hispanic residents occurred on the same balmy days that police officers handed out masks to white visitors sitting close together at a park uninterrupted. Social distancing resembled the unfair practices of stop and frisk brought on by overly aggressive policing of communities of color in the name of social distancing. Police officers made 120 arrests and issued 500 summonses for social distancing violations. Black people make up 68%, while Hispanic people make up 24%, unquote. None of these police officers have been held accountable, which will make the second wave lockdown at the AFT defense an excuse to ramp up brutality. This is also true in ICE facilities where lockdowns spread COVID quicker. Perla Trevizo states in the Texas Tribune, "The coronavirus continues to spread inside immigration detention centers. The number of confirmed cases inside the South Texas ICE Center jumped from 7 to 31 detainees," unquote. The affirmative will ensure that these people will become more vulnerable, which leads me to contention 2, essential workers. Who has the luxury of working from home, of online shopping and adding endless items to their e-cart? Black and brown people make up most of the essential workers, which not only prevent them from staying safe in their houses, but puts them at risk at their work. Devin Hawkins, an instructor of health science, writes, quote, "A greater proportion of Black workers are employed in jobs with a higher likelihood of being exposed to infections that require close proximity to others. For example, a disproportionate share of bus drivers and postal workers and have a lower access to benefits that could potentially mitigate the risk or protect them if they do become sick. As millions apply for unemployment, it is clear that even if we are able to flatten the curve, we will also be confronting the dire health consequences of Americans having their economic well-being destroyed. Employers should do whatever they can to protect and provide for them in this work. This protection and support should include in personal protective equipment, paid sick leave, and workers' compensation benefits," unquote. This would make those moments, as the affirmative says, bonding with your child, that much harder for mothers who are experiencing economic downfalls and cannot afford for their family, which the affirmative would cause because many malls, service shops, salons, etc. are closed. Many also, unfortunately, live check to check. This leads me to my last contention, the economy. Quarantine rules have forced many to file for unemployment, rising to numbers higher than that which reflected the Great Depression. However, during the second wave, there will be a much more political approach to how the government deals with quote unquote assisting people. Adam Sewer, a staff writer at The Atlantic, argues, quote, "The economy cannot be held in stasis indefinitely. The longer it is, the more people will suffer. The federal government can afford the necessary infrastructure and financial aid, but allows for the collective sacrifice of laborers without taking the measures necessary to ensure their safety, while the upper class remains secure at home. But the workers who signed up to harvest food, deliver packages, and stack groceries, drive trains and buses, and care for the sick did not sign up for the war. And the unwillingness of America's political leadership to protect them is a policy decision and not an inevitability," unquote. The affirmative asks whether it is lives over the economy. The negative questions whether you can even have a life if there is no economy. Therefore, we urge a negative ballot that endorses strict guidelines to facilitate a safe reopening. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ryan. So now we'll have a cross-examination between Ryan and Timotopé.
What does it look like to not enforce substantial restrictions or stay-at-home orders?
So the negative would defend a model that requires strict guidelines for how to facilitate a safe reopening of the government. This would include mandating that people wear masks, abide by distancing each other at workplaces, requiring and mandating that places be cleaned repeatedly to ensure that there is no spread of the virus.
Okay, so let's use a restaurant, for example, that would obviously reopen, I guess, in the world of the negative. Yeah. In the world of the negative, if what ensures that a waiter would be able to change gloves and wash hands between every table if they have to keep up with a full restaurant? What ensures that between like the kitchen and the table they will not catch yet another sort of form or like the virus again, etc.?
Well, we believe that stores and restaurants have to do everything within their capacity to ensure the safety of the customers and the workers, which means that even if it means washing your hands multiple times between customers is not a problem insofar as we can save lives and protect and ensure a safe reopening. So we believe that whatever precautions must be taken, must be taken.
All right, so in terms of whatever precaution, how exactly is it that this normal or a super busy work schedule of sorts would be realistically kept up and that a company would be able to take into account each of its workers?
Well, we think that it's the burden of the owners and the managers to be able to ensure that their employees are safe. We believe that we don't believe that washing your hands multiple times a day is an inconvenience when we're talking about lives being saved and the spread being happening, which means that we would ensure that those things happen.
Another question, in terms of, or how do I want to say this? All right, in terms of when like these places do open, do you think that that each worker that returns to work should be tested?
Yes, we believe that testing is a part of the strict guidelines that the negative would endorse, which would ensure that people who do have the virus will be safely quarantined and or put to work differently because that way we would ensure the spread.
So question.
Stop.
So how long exactly do you think that'll take? And would testing need to continue every time a restaurant who has people walking in and out would continually need to be tested for again and again?
Well, we wouldn't be testing the customers. We would be testing and mandating testing from workers, which ensure that people don't spread it. Of course, people will have to wear masks. People will have to distance themselves. Only a certain amount of people will be let in at a time. But those are all things we will take into account when reopening.
All right, thank y'all. So we'll have 2 minutes of preparation time before David's second affirmative speech. So just a note that the speeches that have been given so far, the first and affirmative, for affirmative and negative first speech will be available at the conclusion of this debate via our Slack page, or if you reach out to us, we can give you the documents associated with the first and second negative speech and affirmative speech.
I feel like it's starting to heat up now.
I think so too. Yes. Time. David? All right, good. So our second affirmative speaker, Mr. David Asafu-Ajayi. Sir?
COVID-19 has fundamentally changed the way America operates. In fact, it's changed the way the world operates. But the true question we must ask ourselves is it possible for this to get worse? And how can we mitigate the damage? A stay-at-home order is the best way to do that, and that is the reason why we affirm. First, note that they had no response to our argument that cases increase every single time we engage in a mass influx of individuals in the workforce. When Georgia reopened, they contact traced within the first hour nearly 1,000 cases and nearly 1,000 cases of coronavirus. That is a statistic that cannot be overlooked. This is something that is going to spread potently, and we must have a concrete plan of action for dealing with it. Second, the economy is simply not enough. First of all, it's not under enough threat for us to warrant sacrificing thousands of lives, near 100,000 of lives. But more importantly, is that mindset is particularly problematic and makes it more likely that we will be willing to act willy-nilly with our people. Third, this sets a dangerous precedent, not just for how we think about the economy, but also for how we think about democracy. All of these answers go unaddressed within the 1NC and are a significant reason as to why you should enforce stay-at-home orders. Now, onto their arguments. They say that police brutality has increased. 5 responses. First, no, it hasn't. It has decreased overall because people are in their homes. They have a few examples, but no state or national studies for it. Second, this is a deflection tactic. It takes the attention off of racist cops and attributes their racism to the coronavirus. Third, cops will be able to say that they were under stress because of the virus, which will make them act irrationally and means that there will be more police brutality if we were to just reopen the economy. 4, this is going to happen when you turn police officers who are trained to think of their job as eliminating threats into public health workers. It doesn't mean we should end stay at home, but rather we should put stricter restrictions on law enforcement and provide public health training. 5, the impact of thousands across the country dying as a result of opening the economy is far greater. They say ICE facilities are worse, but reopening the economy literally wouldn't change their state at all. They would still be locked up in those facilities. They say not everyone has the luxury of staying at home. First of all, there are 49 million essential workers, but the workforce is near 300 million people. We don't have enough personal protective equipment to be able to actually help all of them, which means that it would be a logistical nightmare to try to do so. They even said that they wouldn't test customers. But what happens when a customer contracts coronavirus and then gives it to a worker? Those things seem to fundamentally mean that we would need to engage in mass testing, which we don't have the skill to do. Second, not all essential workers would go to work during a lockdown. Many things like telehealth services and education can be switched to an online platform. Finally, they say the economy will be destroyed. 6 responses. First, our Workforce Institute evidence says that pushing workers to spend excess time on site actually destroys productivity. Second, dead workers aren't productive. There's no value if they're dead. Third, reopening the economy will have major costs, including medical costs, which will hurt the economy. 4, workers that are on edge in economic development will be less productive, which means that it will still hurt the economy. 5, we can phase in economic development through lockdown waves. New Zealand proves this. They managed to shift from total lockdown to a phase-in, but had to start with a comprehensive stay-at-home order. They will say New Zealand is not similar, but since the topic is about what states should do, their population seems to match. There's no stopping a recession. Dealing with it won't be easy. The only question is whether thousands of people will get to live or whether we will consign them to die for the economy.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Okay, so now we have a cross-ex between Rutgers debate partners, Mr. David and Mr. Ryan. Go ahead, AH.
Yes, sir.
Go.
So starting with this contact tracing argument, how can you ensure that those 1,000 new cases came from the reopening?
Well, because they matched them to where people went and found trends of individuals that were congregated in certain areas, right? So certain people reported where they were, and it seemed to match up.
Sure. Given that, wouldn't the affirmative then incentivize people to lie about where they're at because of social distancing?
I don't think that that's necessarily true, because most of the country is very much intact in terms of responding well to the virus, or in terms of responding well to questions about the virus, because like no one's trying to poison people. Second, there's no evidence for the fact that people would lie on those surveys. Most of the evidence seems to suggest that they are kind of telling the truth. And I think you should give the population the benefit of the doubt.
Benefit of the doubt, sure, if that's what the affirmative relies on. Talking about police brutality, you said that brutality has decreased and that we are attributing racism to coronavirus. When has it ever been illegal or a problem to be in groups of more than 3 or 4?
I think that that's the entire history of the United States. The fact that Black men can get killed when they are alone means that they're more likely to be killed.
Well, sure, but my question is, when has groups, no matter any racial minority, have been criminalized in any situation other than coronavirus?
I think that there's a whole list of examples of how those people get criminalized outside of whether or not it is illegal. But second is, I don't think that that matters in the context of the argument that we had made, which is that people are literally dying and police officers get to say it was because of the coronavirus, which is the same rationale you use in order to say we should end the lockdown because police officers are arresting people. No, we should punish those police officers, not kill the population.
Sure, especially when they're ordered to then problematize the guidelines that the affirmative set. But let's move on. You say that there is not enough resources to protect workers. What resources, right? Why is it hard to get or make a mask at home, to enforce social distancing, et cetera, at these workplaces?
Well, I'm not exactly sure why it's difficult, but I am definitely sure that it is. We have limited resources. We have limited resources and limited manpower to produce those resources. It is easier to spread those resources out over 49 million people than over 300 million.
Well,
I've never made a mask, so I don't know why it's hard.
So my question is, what resources?
Things like masks, gloves, all of those things. We have a shortage of them, and more importantly, testing. We have a major shortage of testing kits. Which
my last question has to do with this New Zealand argument. I guess what is the similarities between New Zealand's quarantine rules versus America's first wave quarantine?
They are They aren't, which is why we think it would be an effective.
Well, okay. So then, what are the differences?
Well, it's that they have levels of lockdowns, stimulus packages, as well as waves of stimulus packages as opposed to one-time payments, and they order stimulus packages based on what you can do. So if you can't go to work, you get more.
Thank y'all. A good cross-ex. All right. Now we have a 2-minute prep time period for our second negative speaker, Mercy. Carlos, how you feel about the debate so far?
Right now, I think that it's still too close to call, but I'm hoping that there's going to be a lot more comparison about when some of these impacts take place. Like, a question that I have in the back of my mind is, what does it mean to reopen the economy, as well as what does it mean to keep people at home? And then at what point do these impacts that both sides have actually occur? Because a lot of times we'll say people die, therefore we don't have productive workers, but we also don't know necessarily when these things would happen, which I think is a larger part of the tension of where the debate is happening, or rather where the conversation should be.
I agree with that. I'm really interested in some of the details of both the New Zealand model as well as the model of the negative, because one of the things, like I said in the cross-section, that was pretty persuasive to me was the idea of people lying about, their social distancing and lying about where they've been. Because I know personally, if you go to the South Ward, there's definitely people, the whole virus, that have been sitting outside, congregating in groups of 5 or 6 and lying about whether or not they staying in the house. So definitely some ambiguities and some questions I have in that regard of, what exactly does a stay-at-home restriction look like, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's major in terms of not knowing exactly who's social distancing, how you can effectively track it, or even the tracing kind of stuff. I think is real interesting, right. Especially when you hear what's happening on the news. Everybody's New Jersey is really bad, and then you see what's happening in the streets, and people is nothing's happening.
My neighbors around the corner from my house have not been inside the entire crisis. Like they've been outside on Leslie Street in the South Ward the whole crisis. And so I'm really interested to see where this debate puts them in their actions during this crisis and if it's the right response. Okay, so I think prep time is up. Mercy, are you ready?
Good.
All right, awesome. All right, the floor is yours.
We have 3 reasons to vote negative. First is that crackdowns in the name of social distancing will become exacerbated in a world where the affirmative, which harms essential workers to a greater extent. Malaki Jabali, an activist and attorney, argues, quote, the spread of COVID-19 in the United States points a black light on structural and violent racism that has been plagued Americans for generations, along with disproportionate rates of coronavirus and deaths. This pandemic amplifies how unjustly police enforce their authority. Aggressive policing could become even more normalized. The government's inability to coordinate a consistent message, but social distancing may cost thousands of lives. The status quo leaves enforcement of social distancing in the hands of police system built on brutality. It will do more harm than good, end quote. The reason the affirmative model of New Zealand works is because they trust their authorities. Julie McCarthy from NPR writes, social solidarity has been the lesson from New Zealand. Collectivist societies are faring better and more efficiently than fractured individualist societies. End quote. America is that fractured society in which social distancing costs lives. What is needed is not reinvest in quarantine. The negative models cultivate an infrastructure that fully facilitates the public's transition to healthier work conditions. Frank Bruni, writer from NY Time, writes, the big political conversation is about individuals' access to healthcare. But what about the work to keep our air and water safe, to design policies and systems for quickly detecting outbreaks, containing them and protecting entire populations? America needs good information so that governments and mayors can develop rules of social distancing and reopening that are sensible and sustainable and tailored to the situation at hand. America needs a federal government that assertively promotes and helps coordinate that. Not everyone can be, end quote, not everyone can be online shoppers, like Ryan said. The question shouldn't be, should we have another lockdown wave, but rather, how can we reopen safely? That is contention. That contention 2, that is what Devin Hawkins in contention 2 explains, that a lot of people who work for essential workers are disproportionately black, i.e. postal workers and bus drivers. The negative assumes by having a stronger restriction, that means safer outcome. The truth is that people barely stay home. When I look outside, I see dozens of people still standing outside of stores and streets doing normal daily activities. Increasing restrictions only increases Americans' incentives to not want to stay home Onto their arguments. David said that staying home is much more safe, but cross-apply the argument that I just made that talks about how people don't stay home anyway. They give the Georgia example, but the Georgia example does not make any sense. Cross-X proves, but also it takes multiple hours for cases to show in the first place, which proves that this statistic is incorrect. On the police brutality argument, they say that police brutality happens at an all-time rate, but no, police brutality has not increased. Cross-apply bring about all the different forms of Black people that have died due to different forms of quarantine that has been restricted. All over social media, you see Black death exacerbated because quarantine is happening right now. 2, they say that this is the deflection. This within itself is anti-Black because it assumes that because we focus on Black people dying, that means that we're deflecting away from the problem when the actual problem is Black people dying. 4 is that they say that we can train police officers, but historical analysis shows that even when we train police officers, it doesn't matter because they still are racist at the end of the day. They said that the affirmative is not bigger than any other form of like impact because of people dying, but 1, they don't solve for this because they can't prove how they allow for people to stay home. 2 is allow for people to stay home. 2 is that the affirmative, the negative does not lead to people dying because we reopen safely.
You still have technically 2 seconds, but thank you. All right. Cross-X, David, and Mercy. David, unmute yourself.
I'm good.
Good?
Yep.
All right, thank
Mercy,
you.
you ready?
Yeah, I'm good.
We have had 83,000 people die of coronavirus in the United States. Have 83,000 Black people been arrested?
I don't think that's an essential question. I think that goes back into like the argument that's saying that
Wait.
deflect away. Can I finish answering your question?
I'm just confused about why that question doesn't matter if it's about.
No, 83,000 people have not been arrested, but that doesn't disprove the fact that because of quarantine, different forms of police brutality has been exacerbated because.
Right. I'm curious about why those things are worse because of the lockdown. You seem to have just cited that there are more ways they can arrest you, but not that they get worse.
That more Black people being arrested is a worse situation for Black people.
But where's the stat that says more Black people overall are being arrested? Which statistic?
Because for example, there's in the Duane's evidence, it talks about how police brutality and stop and frisks and things like that have been increased because of the quarantine.
That card talks about why those things are the same or why those things happened in New York.
No, the card specifically talks about because of quarantine, different forms of police brutality has been exacerbated.
Okay.
I think you should go back and read the card.
Okay, understood. I want to ask a question about police officers being racist. If your argument is that racist police officers will be racist, why does eliminating the lockdown mean that they will suddenly stop arresting people?
I think that the argument is that I think that the world of negative looks better insofar as that we don't exacerbate different forms of anti-Black violence that happen. Secondly, is that you say that by training police officers that allows them to stop being racist. We say that historical analysis.
I don't think we said that.
No, you literally say that if we train people to do their job, then these different forms of exacerbation do not happen. Historical analysis shows that when we train police officers, they still do the same anti-Black stuff.
Okay, I disagree, but we can have that debate in a second. You say that America doesn't trust their federal government. Is that correct?
You tell me that when we train police officers, then
Mercy, I move. You say that America doesn't trust their federal government, correct?
Yes, we say that the relationship.
Do you have any statistics that says America doesn't trust their state government?
Similarities between New Zealand and America. It was silent. She wasn't able to give me any.
Yeah, I understand.
The differences between New Zealand and America is so unique.
R2AC talked about population. Mercy, I'm just curious. Where do you have a single piece of evidence that says America doesn't trust their state governments? Because this topic is about state governments.
To prove that the relationship between New Zealand and their government is significantly different from
state governments. Where's your evidence about state governments? Because people trust Cuomo.
What do you mean?
Like people trust Cuomo in terms of this coronavirus.
But we will say, I think the negative will argue that different forms of state government decisions is influenced by federal decisions.
So because Trump is a racist, every governor is now bad and won't protect their citizens. I don't think
that's what the 1AC is saying. We are describing the total relationship or the environment or the atmosphere relationship that we have to our government, which is significantly different from New Zealand. Go back to cross-sections. You guys weren't able to get that similarity between New Zealand and the United States.
Thank you. All right. We'll have 2 minutes of prep time and then the first negative rebuttal, which is Ryan. Okay, the 2 minutes of prep time on the clock. Thank you. Carlos, how you feeling?
Spicy.
Spicy. 3 peppers. Cayenne and a ghost.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this question about state government. I don't necessarily agree that just because you're talking about the federal government that's only applicable to the federal government, but I'd like to see where that debate goes.
I also disagree with the fact that, like, this grandiose statement that people just like Cuomo. Like, there's a lot of governors. There's a lot of governors getting a lot of smoke for their responses.
Low key, Governor Murphy getting a little bit of smoke.
Hey, look, Phil needs to be watching this debate right now because it seems that American citizens don't trust our government and our leaders. So, we need to worry about that. This police brutality portion of the debate, because it seems like this is going to be a big, kind of aspect of this debate. How do you feel about that?
Really, the part that I'm looking for in the debate is to see if they can differentiate between the current trends of police brutality and how that has been exacerbated by the coronavirus, right? I want to see what you were calling in debate a link differential between, the existing police brutality versus how it's intensified as a result of coronavirus. I think that if the negative team wins this argument, then it's much stronger if they can substantiate it with that warrant.
Yeah, I think that associate along with, a couple with an argument about the probability of, police brutality increasing or not. I think that a lot of this debate is riddled or talking about claims about how bad things are. Not a lot of discussion about when things will happen or how soon they'll happen or how likely they'll happen. And so
that's why the first thing I said was I need to hear about this time frame.
Shout out to the people in the comments asking about time frame and probability, because I think the debate will definitely come down to this. All right, time is up for prep time. So now we have our first negative rebuttal. Ryan, you ready?
Yep.
Excellent.
Everybody ready? All right, starting now. Although it may sound persuading that we can flatten the curve if everyone puts aside their daily responsibilities, the harsh reality is that many Americans, especially from our communities here in Newark and those around us in Brooklyn and Baltimore, will not experience the privilege of a lockdown because they are essential workers. However, those of us who do stay at home face problematic interactions with the police, as discussed by Mercy. This means that we are winning this debate on two levels. One is proving that the affirmative will cause their impact of lives lost through policing, such as men in the Bronx being punched because they don't have masks, while white park goers at Central Parks are uninterrupted in their daily lives. Two is proving that the economy cannot stand still forever, which will cause another Great Depression through the economy collapsing, which outweighs spending time with your family because the overall well-being of their lives will decrease. Our model of reopening, however, would look like strict guidelines that support workers and families at home and at work. This entails requiring testing, masks, mandating distance at work, mandatory cleaning, management of everyday operations being done differently, and supporting hospital service. This cannot be done while we're in quarantine at home because people still have to go on about their daily lives every day. Although the affirmative says that workers cannot be productive if they have COVID, they cannot be guaranteed the life the affirmative suggests if they do not have a paycheck to support their families. The negative will kickstart the economy and ensure not only safety at their workplace, but at their homes as well. They say that we will set a precedent for how democracy works, but there is no democracy if people do not have free access to express themselves on the market or being able to run their business however they would like to in a world where they are quarantined. Let's talk about the police. Policing are given new guidelines for how to interact with the community based on social distancing. The affirmative will exacerbate harmful interactions with the police based on whether people have masks. How close are you from your mother, from your father, from your son and daughter, from your family, from your neighborhoods in a world where cities are overcrowded? These are questions that outweigh the affirmative's arguments about the democracy, because these are questions of people's lives. There is no democracy without an ability for the free market, without an ability to live your life freely. They say that cops and brutality are caused because of stress and irrationality. The governors are enforcing that cops mandate and control different communities in different neighborhoods, which means that it is not a question about the federal government, but it's a question about how governors enforce police officers, which means that the brink happens in a second wave when things become much more political, much more dirty. You should also trivialize their data that suggests that there was 1,000 new cases, given that those cases could have been caused before the reopening, given testing rates. Their last argument that they go for is this New Zealand model. But the reason why New Zealand worked is because people had a great relationship with their leaders. That is not the case in which police officers can ruin families in America. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, now we'll have prep time for our first affirmative rebuttal from Tim Tope. So, Tope, you have 2 minutes of prep time. All right, Carlos, my man. So I think one of the most interesting portions of this debate that is not necessarily being talked about, but is the idea of adequate protection. So, like, the idea that, like, people can go back to work with PPE. There's going to be enough testing so that we can test every worker that gets to go out and has to work during the virus. And the shortage of those testing. I know one of the comments on a live stream was about how public and essential workers don't have enough PPE. They don't have enough gloves. They don't have enough masks. And so, the feasibility of both strategies seems to, begs the question of the feasibility of both strategies. But specifically the strategy being posited by the negative, or this idea being able to test everywhere. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the feasibility is one of the larger problems, but also, like, I feel like this debate of we're only talking about state governments is sort of making us move away from the conversation that even though state governments are the ones that are responsible, they still have to coordinate with each other. So, like, just look at the Northeast in terms of, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, and things like that, right? Where if we're only looking at the state government and like the shortage of PPE, nobody's here is talking about how you actually can deal with that. Because a lot of times you'll see reports or articles about how equipment and all of this stuff is available, but then you also, in the same news cycle, will see that it's not available or that there is a shortage. So there seems to be a huge problem in terms of the supply chain, which I think isn't really being addressed in this debate, which I would have liked to see.
Yeah, and I think the closest that we got to that was the idea of making our own masks, using our own, materials. But, I feel like that can only stretch but so far and can only provide but so much protection.
I was going to say that the cloth masks, if anything, are primarily for the public, not necessarily for healthcare workers.
Honestly, they're for fashion. Okay, time is up. Timatope, are you ready for your 1AR? All right, unmute yourself. You good?
Am I good now?
Yeah, you're great.
Okay, cool. Wait. This is 3 minutes, right?
Yes, it is.
All right, cool. So everyone's good? When we consider the sacrifices that we are willing to make in order to remain in lockdown versus open up, first, let's consider the problem of resources. We think that a very important thing about what the negative proposes of reopening up, we should think about how it is much easier to distribute the resources that we have among 49 million people than it is 300 to 350 million. When we think about that and how essential workers themselves are already limited in their resources, obviously it is with utopian in the world of the negative to simply reopen. In the argument of making their own masks, we think that that is a problem in itself. And not only is it that probably the bandanas that they would use to make their mask at home probably rep gang colors that would not only not protect them, but probably get them in more trouble with the police, is something that's a problem within itself. Next, their mittens will not protect them at all whatsoever, which is why it is significantly important that we look at the actual essential workers that require these resources, especially when there are multiple modes and methods that are coming out in order to provide for those who have the inability to make it out of their home or do not have the resources to do so, which we think are uniquely significant. Next, we'll go on to the argument about the police forces. And sort of that work, we think that in terms of the police forces and there's an exacerbation of anti-Black violence. One, we think that this isn't a unique argument, and the idea that the claim keeps being brought up that racist people will be racist, and we think that that is a thing that opening more people out, at which people will be in a state of panic, will be running around fighting in stores for gloves, masks, whatever resources are left, only increases the violence that occurs and would actually give police yet another reason to commit all of these significant violences, which is why in terms of the model at which we present, we are just much safer for the public. We think that in terms of the police as an argument, it is still in fact a deflection tactic, and we think that there are certain forms of training, etc., in order to work on specific situations that are a much better alternative. Next, in terms of the economy, we think that there is no stopping of the recession and that dealing with it won't be easy. But the question that you should consider, and the one that is the biggest question, is if we are willing to allow thousands of people to live, or are we going to co-send them to die? In terms of the argument that Ryan brings up about how a paycheck is needed, we think that there are multiple modes and methods that allow for people to survive, at which meals are being provided, stimulus checks are being passed out, etc. etc. And we think that in terms of a democracy at which only a minority is calling for a lockdown to be removed, we should look at models like New Zealand or the ones that the affirmative has presented.
Thank you, Tope. All right, we'll have 2 minutes of prep time for our final negative speech from Mercy. Okay, Carlos, I have a quick question about the last argument that Tope made, which is the argument about livelihoods under restrictions. Do you think that the measures by the government, basically like the stimulus check and other means that they're using to, preserve life during us being locked down, do you think that they're enough?
I mean, I think that's a really difficult question to answer if it's enough, because I think everybody's in different positions. But also, $1,200 means something totally different in New York State versus, for example, like Virginia, right? Or even if you go further south. So I think that it can be helpful, but it doesn't necessarily get to the core of the problem. The other thing that I thought about this debate, the word that just really sticks out in my mind is examples. I think that there was a lot of analysis in the 1AR, but it was a little light on examples. I would have liked to have seen some type of, contextualization for the arguments, because I think that there's a lot of warranted arguments, but it's not necessarily being carried across in a way that's A, relatable, and B, something that is easily understood just from like everyday lived experience.
Certainly. Like I feel like this conversation about masks that we're having, I think this could be really well informed, just thinking about people that we see on the regular. Like I see tons of people with masks that are crocheted that you can see holes in the mask, like you can see through the mask, and it really doesn't. It's not protective, and vice versa with the comment made about bandanas. The gang comment I won't touch on, but the idea that like a bandana can save you it's ridiculous. And I would love to see some more examples, as we get into our last two speeches. Time is up on prep time. Time for our final negative rebuttal. Mercy, are you ready?
I'm good.
Excellent. Your floor is yours.
What is needed is not more quarantine rules for some to feel safe and comfortable. What is needed is a healthier and more efficient way to facilitate the safety of our communities. There are 3 reasons to vote negative. First is that we reduce the crackdown on Black Americans that are targeted by the police. Black men and women under normal circumstances are targeted by police through things like racial profiling. Quarantine exacerbates that form of violence because it gives police officers an excuse. That is our Dwayne and first contention. This false sense of reflection that the 1AC talks about just gives white people another excuse to harm Black people. 2, the second reason is that the world of the negative is more realistic. Not every single profession can be transferred online. The AF imagines a utopian world in which workers like bus drivers and retail workers can provide for their families. The only class that they protect is the upper class. The negative does not exploit workers for the economy, rather gives people a chance to earn money. 3 is that the AF is asking themselves the wrong question. Remember what I said before. It is not a question of should we lock down again, but rather what are ways for safe reopening. We can't stay in our homes forever. They have also conceded the ICE crisis evidence, because when people are locked down in ICE facilities, it allows for people to become more sick and spreads the cause of the virus. This turns the entirety of the AF because it proves that they cannot solve for people in ICE facilities. On their argument, this is why you're going to vote affirmative, because Tope does a really bad job of contextualizing her arguments for which arguments come first. If the negative proves that Black people dying comes first, that's a reason as to why the world of the negative is much more urgent, and a reason as to why you should vote for us. On the police brutality stuff, they have conceded the deflection argument is anti-Black because it depicts Black people as the issue when it's the question of law enforcement, i.e. when Tope says things like, Black people wearing like different forms of masks is bad because like it makes them more vulnerable to the police because of gang signs and things like that. That's a question of police officers being racist and racial profiling others, and does not deal with the root cause issue of the problem. They've ignored all the hysterical analysis arguments that have been made that they cannot train the police to do better insofar as that they have already racist. They say that the affirmative is non-unique, but no, the affirmative is really unique because it proves that they make situations worse for Black people, i.e. the Doyne evidence that talks about different forms of stop and shift. They make the resources argument, but the resources argument does not matter insofar as the resource argument does not matter insofar as that Ryan has done a really good job as contextualizing that. On the economy argument, they exacerbate the economy even more because they assume that we're able to adapt to different forms of methods. Like New Zealand, they are unable to, like New Zealand, they say that, oh, everybody can have different forms of stimulus checks, but that weighs on the economy rather than people being able to go back to work, which actually benefits the economy. It's a question of time frame in which things come first, whether or not the policy of the negative is better. Look, the affirmative cannot solve for the world because the affirmative cannot solve for their world because it's unrealistic, and we are winning on time frame.
Thank you, Mercy. All right, prep time before our final speech. Carlos, anything to say about that blazing fast speech from Mercy?
I think you just took the words out of my mouth. Blazing fast. You could tell she was itching to go a little faster too.
Yeah, she's really upset about that corona messing up the TOC this year. One of the couple of arguments that I think that this debate may come down to, it seems to be this idea of, reopening being the absolute only option for people or everybody to have access to the economy, right? Like, it seems to be this dynamic where the affirmative case will let people starve and will kind of put people in a precarious situation where, they don't know where their next check is coming from. Whereas the negative is positing this future where everyone has tests, everyone has masks, everyone has gloves, and everybody has a check in their pocket. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that everybody's throwing around the word realistic without actually being realistic, which is interesting.
Yeah. It's big facts, big facts.
Because in the same vein of like, we should just reopen, make sure everybody has a chance to earn money. I don't know how that happens when unemployment's so high now, and there's a lot of businesses that won't be coming back after the country reopens. So I'm curious as to how jobs, or rather the unemployment rate, will be affected in a world where they do choose to reopen, as well as how that'll affect people's ability to earn money and whether or not that money is actually enough to sustain yourself. Because that's a large part of the problem, is that tons of people now are still earning money, but the problem is that they're not earning enough money or a living wage, which is why they have to continue working, countless hours doing backbreaking work as essential workers, because they have to provide that money. And that's something that I think needed to be addressed in the last few speeches.
I really wish there would be a comparative time frame between when the money runs out versus when they're going to make enough games to feed their families, right? Like, there's comparative lines between, stimulus funding and checks being made. And I think that, let's see what this last speech does. David, your time is up.
Okay, David, the 2 AR's up.
All right, David, unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was clearing my throat.
It's okay.
Is everyone ready?
Solid. You got the floor.
The biggest problem that they have at the end of this debate is that they have no understanding of just how much of a risk they are willing to put Americans in. They have not a single statistic about what the scale of their impact would actually look like. Meanwhile, 83,000 people and counting have died from coronavirus, many of them Black and brown. The question and answer is simple. Question, should we be willing to kill more of them? Answer, no. They have said that there is a possibility for police brutality to increase. Yes, we think that is true, but they have also said that police officers are going to be racist anyway. They've also fundamentally conceded that police officers will just use the stress of having to manage the population as an excuse to just commit more violence, which is what Tematope says in the 1AR when she says when people are fighting in Soros, police officers are going to be like, that's what we need to stop, and that's how they produce more brutality. They have not answered this, which means that at worst, they make police brutality worse than it is right now. Second, they say if we give police officers an excuse. Quick question, When have police officers ever needed an excuse to kill Black people? Did Darren Wilson need an excuse to kill Mike Brown? Did George Zimmerman need an excuse to kill Trayvon? No, they just said we were scared for our lives and the whole system believed them. This is going to happen regardless. Even their question about economic recession, an economic recession is going to happen regardless. The only question is whether or not people are alive and whether or not they are well. Our model makes sure that both happens. Let's go through why. They still are only answering the affirmative as if it's a question of whether or not we lock the population down versus everything else that is associated with the New Zealand model. Things like waves of stimulus checks and proportional stimulus checks make it possible for people to be able to live even when they are in a lockdown, and makes it more likely that we will be able to phase those things in. But more importantly, their surface level analysis about the economy does not rise to the level of deaths that are going to happen as a result of integrating the population. People are going to come into close contact with each other, and that risk is far too great. Second is that the way that this disease gets transmitted is going to do much more damage to people sooner than economic recessions, which are manageable by things like changing interest rates. The economic recession doesn't kill people in 2 weeks, but coronavirus does, which is why you should be willing to take the risk of keeping people in lockdown if it means that they're going to be safe. I'm not willing to sacrifice my family for a conception of an economy that you would agree has never truly served Black people. Our argument is that we should take every opportunity to keep them safe. Even if they are right that those things are going to be done at a lesser rate, our argument is that it is much better than just putting them in the line of fire and letting them die of coronavirus.
Thank you, David. And that will conclude our first Alumni Debate Series COVID-19 2020 edition. Yay! All right, we're gonna give the judges like 2 minutes. So judges, y'all have like 2 minutes to collect your thoughts before you all get comment. Is that enough time for you all? 2 minutes? Yeah? All right, 2 minutes just to collect your primary thoughts. Carlos, any primary thoughts about the debate?
Something that was really funny to me that you might have seen a reaction to was when David said they don't need an excuse to kill Black and brown people, and then literally gave an excuse right afterward.
One of my favorite part of David's speech was all the things that didn't show up in this debate until this last speech. I just want to, I call it the David special, the new and the two, and I love it. I think that was the first speech. It's the specialty. I will say, I think that was the first speech in the debate that gave me some genuine comparison between when and how likely things are to get worse. And I think that at least for me as an observer, was a really good point of clarification when I'm determining whether or not people need money to pay for things or if people need to stay in the house and not catch the virus. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I agree that it was probably one of the more comparative speeches. What I would have liked to have seen, though, is more of the why certain things matter more than others. You know what I'm saying? As in, because like there was weighing in the sense that they would say, oh, my impacts outweigh on this, or, you know, time frame comes here, but not necessarily why that then means they win the debate. Right. Like
if I want
I'm trying to avoid using jargon, but I feel like there wasn't like much closing of doors in the speech. I feel like they tried, but there wasn't a definitive, I guess, solution as to what it is that we should or shouldn't do. And maybe it's because there isn't one, but I would have liked to have seen more of that, both in the 2NR as well as the 2AR.
Yeah, more of, if I win this argument, I win the debate because. Right. Yeah, definitely I think would have guided the debate a little bit more clearly. But all in all, I think this is a good round.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it got spicy towards the
middle. Yeah,
it
definitely got a little, a couple peppers in there. I appreciate it. All right, time is up for our judges. Will any of our judges like to volunteer to speak first? Who looks the most nervous? I'm gonna pick Kevin.
Okay.
No, Miss Cruz.
I was gonna say, since I'm the oldest person, I could go first if you want.
All right, Miss Cruz, go ahead.
First, let me just say it's really nice to see all of you guys. Jeez, I haven't seen Kevin since he was in high school. So hi, Kevin. But I mean, I enjoyed it. I think I'm the only person on the panel who's on the West Coast. So it's interesting that there's like, it was centered pretty much on what's happening on the East Coast as opposed to what's happening across the United States. And I think it varies across the United States, especially when you're talking about how governors are responding. So just something that kind of caught my eye. But I was interested in this time frame argument in terms of what needs to happen, both in terms of the negative, in terms of, you know, them saying we can have this more robust kind of return to work, and also in terms of the affirmative and talking about when everyone's staying home, you know, at what point that ends, at what point it doesn't become essential anymore. And it kind of strikes me that one's the precursor for the other, but no one ever really talks about that all that much. Like, you need to have one in order to get the other one to get going at some point. And then my last two comments are just about, you know, feasibility and what's actually practical and what can actually happen. And I think a lot of people talked about that, you know, just what that means in terms of the debate when you're evaluating the issues, and also this issue of scarcity that comes up at the end, and what that means, both in terms of locking people down versus letting them go out, you know, in terms of resource depletion and just the availability of resources and just even having money to get those things. But overall, I thought it was really interesting just to hear kind of the different arguments about why we should all stay home or why we should all, you know, be able to go out and go back to work. Thanks again.
Thank you, Ms. Cruz.
Thank you.
Would you like to pick a winner?
Uh-oh.
No.
That was bait. That was bait. It's all right. That was bait.
They're all winners in my book.
There we go. That's the right response. Thank you, Ms. Cruz. Mr. Oshiro.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? So one of the things that I definitely realized is as I'm judging this online debate that I'm a terrible flower on Evernote or Word. It's just, I need to go back to a pad. I saw Diana taking notes, and that was the smart thing to do. So it was a little bit tough for me to kind of follow the extensions. But so great job by the debaters. And by the way, Carlos and Devon, great job setting this up. That was really a lot of fun. So from a decision-making criteria, I'm going to take a step back from that because like Diana, I don't want to make a choice just yet. But what I would say, I noticed a couple like maybe some missed opportunities, right? So I'm an old school debater, right? So I look at the wording of the resolution first, and I think that the debate about states comes in pretty late in the round. I thought that there was an opportunity to really talk about state and territories. I'm really kind of I thought territorial debate should have been there earlier, because when we think about territories in the United States, like Native American nations, Pacific Islanders and such, those folks got history of bioweapon and smallpox, and you can make parallels of what's going on with COVID. And I think there's a massive opportunity lost to talk about that history. So think about that if this happens again. So bring that up, I think, a little bit earlier. I thought there was a couple of comments through debates, like talking about like the stimulus checks, and maybe stimulus checks is a way to keep the economy going. And yet what's not discussed in that debate is that stimulus checks don't come from states, they come from the Fed, right? And if Fed's paying the stimulus checks, then what part of the debate does that really have? I thought the analysis on, or the analogy of the gang colors was an interesting one, right? Like that Black folks are forced to go back out and work, but then they have to be put in a position of non-trust, right? So, I thought that was going to go somewhere. I think maybe, again, it's a shortened debate with less time, so it's sometimes a little bit tougher to unravel, but I thought that was great. So all in all, hey, congratulations to the debaters. Thanks for making this a success. I had a lot of fun, and hope to be part again.
Thank you, Mr. Oshiro. Senor Snacks. Unmute yourself.
There we go. Hola.
Hola.
So yeah, I would definitely want to second what previous panelists have said about how it's a great debate on both sides. How, you know, much kudos to those of you who organized this. I'm sure it wasn't just you gentlemen, but the point is, thank y'all, because this is definitely an impressive event, I would say. Not just considering the topic, but also the participants. You know, these are definitely some of the highest quality individuals you could find. So seriously, that's pretty impressive. And as far as the actual debate goes, you know, I thought, first of all, I thought it was interesting the way that the negative went about. You know, I thought the strategy, it definitely was not what I expected, although at times their focus on the economy was what I expected, which is I felt the most problematic part of the negative is that even though it seemed to kind of have a strategy that would have done exactly what the affirmative was trying to do, which is to say prioritize individuals' lives, I felt like overall the execution just left a little bit lacking. And I'm not sure if that was because of the fact that kind of like what Shira was mentioning, but I still think that overall the negative again had a good strategy. Maybe the execution as far as focusing on individuals' lives may have been a bit better. And yeah, thought it was a really good debate. It was pretty impressed on both sides.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Snacks. Our final panelist, Mr. White.
Well, first, thank you all for providing the information on COVID-19. I want to say that these are not just kids who were just looking on YouTube. These are actual debaters who do research, who provide you with proper information. So I want to take the time out to thank you all for providing the public with that information. I thought the econ debate was pretty good. The one thing I thought was lacking on the econ debate is why should the general public be concerned with economic collapse, right? Explain. I think you should walk down what it means or what it will look like if what happens, like what is the impact if the economy doesn't get up and running, right? Is there a time frame that you would like to see the economy up and running for, right? And then what is the effect if it doesn't get up and running by X time frame that you decide to isolate? With this, yeah, those are the majority of my comments. Good debate.
Thank you, Chaz. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, so, you know, we're just going to wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Those of you that tuned in during the live with the commentary, the chance that I did get to see some of them, they were pretty funny and some other really good questions that were posed. So thank you. This debate will be posted. Well, it will remain on Facebook as just a video you can view, but it'll also be posted on our YouTube page. So if you haven't already liked the Newark Debate Academy Facebook or the YouTube page, go ahead and do that now because there will be more of these. It is the first of what we hope to be a longer series, especially as we find ourselves in the house and try to find things to do. You know, hopefully we might even be able to get some alumni, cough, cough, to engage in some of these debates moving forward. So if anything, just stay tuned. We will have other debates and other content coming out. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and have a great evening.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.